10. Scott Taylor. One of the strangest encounters that police in Titusville experienced last year involved a sword-wielding man who emerged from behind 4-foot-high flames in the middle of the road. Officers spotted the fire during their routine patrol. When they stopped to see what was going on, the man appeared. In addition to brandishing a weapon, he was drinking alcohol at the scene and had a knife in his waistband. The blaze was occurring in front of the house of a man named Scott Taylor, who the authorities had gotten to know pretty well through frequent visits stemming from criminal complaints. In fact, they had been to Taylor's residence 5 times over the previous 6 months for the same exact reason. As it turned out, the man had a thing for starting illegal fires on the sidewalk and the road, and it had become an ongoing problem. Taylor was sitting in his front yard when officers approached. He was chugging from the half-gallon bottle of rum in his hand, but he cooperated when the cops told him to drop his weapons. When asked why he started this most recent fire, Taylor had no answer. Police took him into custody and charged him with intentional or reckless burning and felony criminal mischief. The suspect continued to misbehave from behind bars by breaking an overhead sprinkler and intentionally flooding his cell. 9. Trey Cornwell. Last May, 29-year-old Trey Cornwell became the latest Florida man to make news headlines for a crazy arrest. It was arguably the large lightning bolt tattoo covering half his face that drew widespread attention, rather than the actual crime he was accused of. But that was also a strange story in its own right. The eccentrically inked man was accused of stealing an ambulance from a hospital in Hernando County while its crew was inside the emergency room dropping a patient off. He drove the emergency vehicle to the Miramar Beach area in Walton County and got it stuck in the mud and sand near the water. Cornwell left the ambulance at the scene and was later taken into custody. He was charged with grand theft auto and held on $10,000 bail. It wasn't his first rodeo with the law. A decade earlier, when he was 19, Trey had gotten into some trouble for allegedly stealing his stepfather's wallet. He was reportedly caught in the act, but sped off in his vehicle as his family members tried to stop him. The ordeal ended with Trey taking a sudden sharp right turn, causing a pursuing relative to be ejected from the truck bed. 8. William Hodge. Police officers in Daytona Beach Shores looked on in shock last year as a 32-year-old man named William Hodge tried to throw an alligator onto the roof of a building at around 3:30 in the morning. When the suspect failed to achieve his original goal, he grabbed the reptile by its tail and slammed it against the building's awning. Then he threw the creature to the ground and stomped on it before throwing it over his shoulder and against the ground one more time, according to the arrest affidavit. Hodge reportedly told officers that he jumped a fence and trespassed into a nearby miniature golf course, where he stole the gator. When the police asked Hodge why he committed the bizarre act, he reportedly said that he was teaching the gator a lesson. He was taken into custody and charged with animal abuse, possession and injury of an alligator, and unarmed burglary of an unaccompanied dwelling. And the trouble didn't end there. After he was apprehended, the suspect tried to flood his holding cell by clogging the toilet and drains with toilet paper. The good news is that the alligator received a clean bill of health and was returned to its home at the miniature golf course. 7. Antoine McDonald. Even the Easter Bunny got involved when a fight broke out one night outside an Orlando bar in 2019. Well, it was a man dressed as the Easter Bunny. His name is Antoine McDonald, and he jumped into the fray when he saw a woman getting punched, which made him feel like he had no choice but to come to her defense. Another witness said that they saw a man spitting on the woman before McDonald got involved. The costume-clad hero immediately began throwing punches in an attempt to break up the fight. Josh Maines, who manages the bar that the brawl broke out in front of, told NBC News that he was at a loss for words at what he saw after he heard a commotion and rushed outside. But he also admitted that he couldn't be too surprised because that's how Sundays, fun days, go around here in Orlando. A police officer saw the scuffle and quickly broke it up. Viral footage showed McDonald throwing punches into the air even after the fight ended because he was still hyped up over the ordeal. At first, the cops thought the encounter was staged. They even threatened to arrest McDonald if they saw him engaging in any similar interactions in the future. But the Good Samaritan managed to clear up the confusion when he explained that he was just a bystander with good intentions, who sprang into action when he saw a woman in peril. 6. Melody Carr. When employees at the Country Inn and Suites in Ocala noticed a rowdy bikini-clad woman at the hotel's pool last year, none of them remembered checking her in. The manager approached the unidentified guest and asked which room she was staying in. She reportedly became angry and walked away, refusing to disclose her room number because she didn't have one. The disruptive individual was 42-year-old Melody Carr, and according to staff members, she was causing a disturbance because the pool is for guests only. So the manager called the police and asked them to cite her for trespassing. An officer tracked her down at another nearby hotel, where she was walking her dog. Carr allegedly told the cop that she didn't do anything wrong and to leave her alone. She also accused the manager, who called the police, of being jealous of her because, in her words, her body looked good. The woman gave a slew of strange excuses for her unauthorized presence at the hotel, including a story about how her boyfriend was staying there but had stormed off in a rage. She also said that she planned to keep her car in the parking lot until she could get it repaired, but peeled away under the business's threat to have it towed. The responding officer smelled alcohol on Carr's breath and charged her with disorderly intoxication. 5. Dr. Love. When he was just 18 years old, Malachi Love Robinson managed to convince the public that he was a medical doctor. He claimed to hold multiple degrees, including a PhD and an MD, and his patients believed him. But the ruse didn't last very long. The so-called Dr. Love was caught stealing from his patients in 2015 and was charged with grand larceny. He argued that he never pretended to be a doctor and described himself as a naturopathic physician. But the court didn't buy the explanation, and the young man was sent to prison for 21 months. Sadly, Love Robinson's first stint behind bars didn't teach him to stay out of trouble. He made headlines yet again last year at the age of 23 for allegedly stealing over $10,000 from a shipping broker he worked for. Authorities accused the man of having clients send money to his personal bank account rather than the company's account. Once again, Love Robinson found himself facing a grand theft charge, as well as fraud. 4. Timothy Munford. When 25-year-old Timothy Munford broadcasted himself renting a jet ski on Facebook Live 2 years ago, he clearly wasn't thinking about the fact that he was wanted for violating his probation. The carefree felon streamed a video of himself driving to a Southside jet ski in Daytona Beach, making his whereabouts loud and clear to anyone who was watching. Unfortunately for Munford, law enforcement happened to be among his audience. In fact, he was still recording when police arrived at the scene and took him into custody. The entire arrest was broadcast on the wanted man's Facebook page. A spokesperson from the Volusia County Sheriff's Office noted that they considered Munford to be possibly armed and dangerous. A search of his vehicle turned up the handgun that he was rumored to carry, as well as a sizable stash of bullets. Investigators also found a bag of what appeared to be the deadly drug fentanyl, some marijuana, and some cash. Munford's fun day in the sun ended behind bars. He was hit with a slew of charges, including being a convicted felon in possession of a weapon and/or ammo, fentanyl trafficking, and possession of narcotics paraphernalia. 3. Dominic Taddeo. After serving decades of federal time for murdering 3 people and attempting to kill others, a New York mob hitman named Dominic Taddeo took the first opportunity he could to escape from custody. The 64-year-old was moved to a halfway house in February and barely spent a month there before he slipped out of sight during an authorized doctor's appointment that he had obtained permission to leave the premises for. Taddeo's charges date back more than 30 years. In 1992, he pleaded guilty to racketeering charges in relation to hits he had carried out during the 80s. Even though he's from Rochester, New York, he served out his time at a medium-security facility northwest of Orlando in Coleman, Florida. Last year, the aging inmate requested an early release from a judge in western New York based on his ailing health. He suffers from numerous conditions, including hypertension and obesity, but the judge had no mercy and denied Taddeo's request after prosecutors argued that the man's medical records did not suggest that he was particularly unhealthy. Taddeo's life on the lam didn't last very long. Just days after escaping, he was captured at an apartment in Hialeah. Federal agents didn't explain how they tracked him down, but commended the U.S. Marshals involved in the search for their quick thinking and tenacious work. It wasn't the first time Taddeo managed to vanish from right underneath the watchful eyes of the authorities. Back in 1987, he went on the run after being released on $25,000 bail. He was gone for 2 years before law enforcement finally caught up to him and brought him to justice for the allegations he had tried to avoid facing. 2. Woman drives on airport runway. A 42-year-old woman recently held up flights at Southwest Florida International Airport near Fort Myers when she decided to crash her car through the gates and drive onto the runway. Operations were disrupted for roughly a half hour as she steered her vehicle through a restricted entry across the tarmac and towards a Sprint Airlines airplane. Authorities were quick to respond. It is an airport after all, and were met with extremely erratic behavior from the woman, who reportedly screamed obscenities at officers and threatened to blow their brains out. She refused to explain why she had rammed through a gate and driven onto the airfield. Thankfully, nobody was hurt during the bizarre fiasco. There was no damage to the runways, and there were no significant delays. Police charged the suspect with reckless driving, criminal mischief, violating a designated operational area of an airport, and threatening a public servant. She was released after posting a $205,500 bond and is free while the case works its way through court. 1. David Hines. Sadly, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, many people misused the generous financial assistance that the federal government provided to prevent widespread economic disaster. In order to get the money to those who needed it urgently, it was much easier than usual for people to obtain funding that they may not have necessarily needed. Businessman David Hines took advantage of this easy access shortly after the pandemic began by submitting as much as $13.5 million in fraudulent loan applications to the Paycheck Protection Program, which was meant to provide relief to struggling companies. He claimed on the applications that he planned to use the money to issue payroll payments to his employees. The 29-year-old was ultimately approved for nearly $4 million in assistance, and he allegedly used the money not to keep his workers afloat, but for a high-end sports car and other frivolous personal expenses. Within days of receiving the payout, Hines reportedly spent around $318,000 on a 2020 Lamborghini Huracan. He is also accused of blowing money at upscale retailers and resorts in the Miami area. Thankfully, the alleged scammer's fun was short-lived. Authorities seized the Lamborghini and slapped Hines with several charges, including 1 count of bank fraud, 1 count of making false statements to a financial institution, and 1 count of engaging in transactions in unlawful proceeds. And the law did not go easy on the disgraced business owner, who pleaded guilty to 1 count of wire fraud earlier this year. Hines was sentenced to more than 6 years behind bars for his gross misuse of government funds.
Number 8. Patricia Ebel. A bikini-clad grandma named Patricia Ebel found herself in some hot water back in 2015 when she rear-ended a Ford Mustang with her BMW. She was driving her 10-year-old grandson home from a day at the pool in Naples, Florida, when the crash occurred. A local news crew captured the strange scene on camera as Collier County Sheriff's deputies administered a sobriety test to the barely clothed woman. She smelled strongly of alcohol, according to the arrest report, and allegedly she completely bombed the sobriety test. Police accused Ebel of having a blood alcohol content of more than twice the legal limit and charged her with driving under the influence. When a reporter asked the grandmother if she knew why she was being taken into custody, she said no. A judge sentenced Ebel to probation and banned her from drinking alcohol for a year. Apparently, the message didn't sink in though, because she was busted again for drinking in 2016. This time her blood alcohol content tested at more than twice the legal limit during her visit to a probation officer. Oh, Granny. Ebel managed to sort out her legal issues, and in 2017, she opened up to Inside Edition about her scandalous run-ins with the law. She said that several people offered to buy the bikini she was wearing when she got her DUI, but that she held on to the two-piece. Patricia also admitted that she still drives around in a bikini, but that she wears a cover-up now, which perhaps isn't as crazy as it sounds, considering she lives in Florida. Number 7. Michael Swanson. Police in Midwest City, Oklahoma received an alarming call last year from a local resident named Jackie Roller, who said that a 13-year-old grandson Chris had been shot by a 69-year-old relative named Michael Swanson. Some news articles identify the suspect as the boy's grandfather, but it's unclear whether that was the case. Needless to say, it's safe to assume that the elder gentleman was a grandfather-like figure to the teen, until he decided to shoot him. Officers rushed to the scene, where they were met with Swanson's threats to either kill himself or force the police to kill him because he refused to go back to prison. The suspect initially held the victims hostage, but he eventually let them go. The standoff between Swanson and law enforcement lasted for hours. Police deployed tear gas and summoned a SWAT team, and finally managed to get the distressed elderly man out of the house. Christopher, the teen who was shot in the ordeal, said that Swanson fired a bullet at him after the two got into an argument. When his grandmother Jackie arrived home, Swanson reportedly told her that she might want to go check on the boy, and admitted to shooting him. He also told Jackie that he wasn't done shooting Chris, and that he planned to do it again, this time in front of her. He then allegedly said that he was going to kill the entire family. The boy's aunt, Christina Slemmer, told local station KFOR that Swanson had started acting strange after moving in with the family, and that they suspected him of using drugs. He was charged with shooting with intent to kill, and for being a felon in possession of a firearm. Number 6. Christopher Allen. Recent news reports out of Greensburg, Indiana detail the shocking accusations against 48-year-old grandfather Christopher D. Allen, who is facing an attempted murder charge for allegedly attacking his 5-month-old granddaughter. Little Briley Adams wound up in the hospital with catastrophic injuries. At last update, her condition was improving, but she was still fighting for her life. Briley's family told police that Christopher attacked her out of nowhere one afternoon in March, and that he hit the baby in the face multiple times, to the point where she turned blue and needed CPR. Loved ones were left baffled that someone could do that to a helpless child, let alone their own granddaughter. Fraternal grandmother Jennifer Powers told local station Fox 59 that she was struggling to process how or why the unfathomable ordeal happened. She further explained that she didn't even remember the ride to the hospital because she was in complete shock. The baby is expected to survive, but will be in a neck collar for several months as she endures a lengthy road to recovery from a fractured eye socket, a fractured skull, and serious neck injuries. Briley also suffered from a brain bleed and was hooked up to a feeding tube because she was unable to swallow when she arrived at the hospital. Her mother, Madeline Hadley, was heartbroken, but hopeful in a news interview, during which she said the little girl is a fighter and that she is even smiling and playing with her toys, despite all she's been through. Hadley hopes to learn what caused her father to act so out of character. Alan is currently being held on a $10 million bail. His trial is scheduled to begin June 7th. Number 5. Chuck Moser. Late last year, a 70-year-old grandfather from Virginia named Charles Chuck Moser was arrested for allegedly jumping off skyscrapers with a parachute. Someone had captured the incident on camera and reported it to the police. A subsequent investigation led them to Moser, who they have accused of trespassing onto private property in Fairfax County for the sake of jumping off a building that was under construction. Detectives also connected the suspect with 2 similar incidents that took place in 2020. Moser adamantly denied the allegations in an interview with Fox 5 DC. The military veteran, avid runner, home improvement contractor, and grandfather of 6 told the station that he's simply the fall guy for crimes that detectives have failed to identify the real culprit behind. The act of base jumping is not illegal in the area, but for safety reasons, it's definitely not recommended. Police have investigated numerous base jumping incidents in recent years, based on the fact that the jumper trespassed onto private property to carry out their daring deed. Moser was a suspect in at least 6 incidents, but he was never charged in several cases due to a lack of evidence, and most of them exceed the statute of limitations at this point. In other words, it's too late to slap Moser with additional charges for incidents that happened a long time ago, whether he's guilty or not. The suspect is all too aware of how far back the allegations and police probes against him go, but he made sure to point out that there was a lack of proof behind the suspicions, including any fingerprints at the crime scene or footage revealing his actual face. Moser himself agrees that the area where the most recent incident occurred isn't very safe for base jumping. He faces 3 misdemeanor trespassing charges. His court date was set for February 12th, but we were unable to find any news updates on how the case played out. Number 4. Charlotte Simpson. In 2019, when a green minivan failed to pull over for flashing lights in London, Kentucky, police weren't just going to go away. They followed the vehicle until it pulled into a driveway and proceeded to question its occupants, 32-year-old Rebecca Jean Fultz and her 69-year-old mother, Charlotte Simpson. Officers originally planned to pull the minivan over for a simple traffic stop, but they soon realized that both women were wanted on outstanding bench warrants. Things took an even uglier turn when Rebecca refused to exit the vehicle, at which point Charlotte declared that there was a baby in the van. But the child safety seat was empty, and there were no signs of an infant at first glance. After rifling through the garbage-strewn, insect-infested vehicle filled with bags of trash and feces-covered clothing, the police found a 16-day-old baby boy on the floor between the 2 front seats. He was covered in ants, dehydrated, had a dirty diaper, and was struggling to breathe, according to the Laurel County Sheriff's Office. The agency also pointed out that the van had no air conditioning and the situation was dire. A deputy drove the ambulance to the hospital so that the paramedics could tend to the ailing child. Police arrested Fultz and Simpson on several charges, including first-degree criminal child abuse. In a jailhouse interview with local station WKYT, Fultz claimed that the police exaggerated the severity of her son's condition. She insisted that he had just a few heat bumps and that she wasn't a bad mother, but she declined to explain why the baby wasn't in his car seat. Simpson told the interviewers that Rebecca was a good mother, but also failed to explain the little boy's obviously unacceptable condition. Number 3. Linda Kennison. A 58-year-old grandmother from Connecticut named Linda Kennison made headlines on Thanksgiving this year when she was arrested in connection with the death of her 6-week-old grandson. Just days earlier, her daughter Crystal Krasowski had dialed 911 and reported that her baby was pale and that there was stuff coming out of his nose and that he was breathing lightly. He was rushed to the hospital, where he died a few days later. A post-mortem examination found no clear signs of abuse, according to the state police. Kennison told investigators that she and Crystal had found the baby in his distressed state after placing him in a bassinet. But the women's stories didn't add up, so detectives pushed harder for information, hoping one of them would crack. Crystal allegedly admitted that she had smothered the boy for 20 minutes until he stopped moving because she was stressed out about life. She already had one child to take care of and didn't feel like she could handle another. When her son became still, she reportedly put him in a swing and simply carried on with her day. Kennison, who was at the home that day, admitted that she knew the baby wasn't breathing, but claimed that she had no idea Crystal had hurt him. They tried putting food in the child's mouth to make it look like he was alive and well, but it didn't work. When the deranged mother-daughter duo finally decided to call 911, Kennison allegedly told Crystal to lie to the police to avoid losing custody of her other child. During the call, she followed her mother's advice and claimed that the baby was breathing lightly. But this clearly wasn't the case, according to prosecutors. Police charged Crystal with first-degree manslaughter. Kennison was charged with risking injury to a child. Number 2. Drinking on an empty stomach. Police in Broadview Heights, Ohio, recently responded to a call about a car accident involving one vehicle on Interstate 77. The person who called 911 described seeing the car smashed against the guardrail with the driver slumped over the steering wheel. Officers arrived on the scene to find it as the caller described. The crash involved a silver Hyundai Elantra with Pennsylvania plates, a heavily damaged front end, and a missing front tire. According to police, the woman behind the wheel smelled strongly of booze and wasn't wearing a seatbelt. She reportedly complained that her wrist hurt and that she was on her way to her son's home to visit her granddaughter. The driver claimed that the vehicle hit a patch of ice while she was taking a quick second to look at her phone, at which point she lost control of the car. An officer noticed a wet spot on her pants while walking her to an ambulance, indicating that she may have urinated on herself. A search of the woman's car turned up several empty single-shot bottles of Fireball whiskey. She allegedly admitted to drinking the alcohol and taking oxycodone on an empty stomach earlier in the day. The grandma was taken in on a slew of charges, including driving drunk, not wearing a seatbelt, failure to control, and open container. Number 1. Grandpa I. In early March, police on the Philippine island of Catanduanes charged a 63-year-old grandfather with nearly 1,500 counts of rape. A law enforcement spokesperson identified the suspect only by his alias, I. The arrest came after a regional judge issued a warrant for the man's arrest for 1,050 counts of statutory rape and 437 counts of rape. He was the region's most wanted suspect at the time he was charged, and he is accused of repeatedly victimizing 2 young relatives over a 5-year period. These are some extremely serious allegations, which is why there was no recommended bail in this disturbing case. The survivors are now in a safe and secure place, and the suspect remains behind bars while he waits to be brought to justice for his alleged heinous actions. No maximum possible sentence has been announced, but in the Philippines, any rape charge can carry a life sentence. Speaking with Vice News, police spokesperson Emsol Ikawat described the case as shocking. The arrest came shortly after the Philippine president signed a bill raising the legal age of consent from 12 to 16. Activists hope that the milestone legislation will help authorities tackle the ongoing problem of sexual abuse against children in the country, where 7 out of every 10 rape survivors are minors.
10. Violence against the pregnant. A football player for the Miami Hurricanes was arrested in 2021 after he beat a pregnant girlfriend. His name is Avonte Williams, and he was arrested in July on a single count of aggravated battery on a pregnant woman. According to the arrest report, officers with the Miami-Dade Police Department arrived at the apartment where Williams was living with his girlfriend. They'd been arguing because even though his girlfriend was pregnant with his child and they lived together, Williams was messing around with another woman. When confronted with his treachery, the football player kicked his pregnant girlfriend out of his apartment instead of owning up to what he did. At least he gave her the courtesy of packing some stuff up before she left. He went out for a bit, hoping that when he got back she would be gone. But when he returned, his girlfriend, now ex-girlfriend, was still packing her items into boxes. He was so mad that he grabbed her by the hair and started throwing her around. He then dragged her outside and threw her on the ground, and that was when the neighbors called the cops. Williams was ranked the top safety in the 2020 class. But after it came to light what he'd done, UM's athletics department dismissed him from the football program. He was also suspended from all team activities. In other words, he can look forward to never being a sports star ever again. 9. Bad volleyball players. 2 women's volleyball players for FAU walked into a fitting room at Macy's retail store in Boca Raton back in 2017. According to the Boca Raton Police Department, when they entered the fitting room, their bags were pretty much empty, but when they walked out, their bags were practically bursting. Emily Hayes and Corinne Varney were arrested by the police for shoplifting. They tried to get away with over $1,400 in women's activewear clothing, along with a few choice pieces of Calvin Klein. They were busted by the asset protection representative at the retail store, who found the 2 young girls incredibly suspicious. They were carrying bags that were too big, they were acting dodgy, and they were clearly stuffing clothes into their bags while in the fitting rooms. The young women were arrested and charged with grand theft, then kicked out of Macy's forever. But all these years later, the horrible mistake of shoplifting hasn't completely ruined their lives. In fact, it actually looks like getting caught helped to push the young women back on the right path. 8. Spitting on the fans. UCLA basketball player Mac Etienne got in some big trouble in early 2022 for allegedly spitting on fans during a game. It's important to note the fans were from the rival team. It was still a pretty unsportsmanlike thing to do. It happened after his team lost to the University of Arizona at the McKale Center in Tucson. After he lost, as he was returning to the locker room, he started spitting on the fans. Then, once he was in the locker room, the university police officers detained him for assault with the intent to injure, provoke, or insult another person. He was arrested and taken away, though the police never put him in handcuffs. It's a weird situation, and one that's still ongoing. As of right now, Mac has pleaded not guilty to what became a misdemeanor assault charge. The case will probably be going on for the better part of the rest of 2022. 7. The 2006 murder of Brian Patter. In 2021, an arrest was finally made in the case of Brian Patter, the murdered football player for the University of Miami. He was shot to death almost 15 years ago outside his apartment building in 2006. His murder had gone unsolved ever since. But now, police in Miami have finally confirmed that it was Rashawn Jones, Brian Patter's teammate from between 2004 to 2006, who did the killing. According to the detectives on the case, Brian, just 22 years old at the time and an NFL hopeful, was walking from his car to the staircase of his apartment building on November 7th. As he approached the building, he was shot in the back of the head. It was brutal, but at least he didn't feel any pain. There was no suffering or even fear. He was just walking, and then he wasn't alive any longer. After the murder, Brian's family was in disarray, especially because they had a pretty strong hunch that Rashawn Jones was responsible. But the police failed to put the evidence together that they needed to make an arrest. It took them a decade and a half to finally build up a case against him. The case basically consisted of phone records, a ping from a cell phone tower placing him at the scene of the homicide, and an eyewitness who identified Jones in a lineup. 6. A homeless man with a knife. Celia Barquin Arozamena was a star college golfer from Spain who met her untimely end while playing around near her campus in Iowa. It happened back in September of 2018. Celia was finishing her degree at Iowa State University and was one of the best golfers in school. She had been working toward joining the Pro Tour and was almost certainly guaranteed a spot. But on Monday morning, when she went to play her round alone, she ran into somebody she'd never expected. A homeless man had wandered onto the golf course with a knife. He stabbed Celia to death and then chucked her body in a pond. Her corpse was only discovered when another player found her abandoned golf bag and followed the trail of carnage. A man named Colin Daniel Richards, just 22, and already known to police for his history of violence, was arrested shortly after and charged with murder. According to investigators, Richards had an urge to kill a woman. That was his only motive. He'd wandered out from his homeless encampment near the golf course until he stumbled upon Celia, who just so happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. 5. Murder at a gas station. A former football player for the University of Georgia has been charged for a brutal shooting death that happened in March of 2021. His name is Akil Nasir Crumpton, and he was the wide receiver for the Bulldogs in 2017 and 2018. But in 2022, he was arrested in Philadelphia for murdering a gas station clerk. Crumpton walked into the gas station dressed entirely in black and holding a handgun. He simply walked to the counter of the racetrack gas station near the outskirts of Watkinsville and shot 23-year-old Elijah Wood to death. It was cold-blooded murder. Sadly, this is a tragic example of a promising career going straight down the toilet. Crumpton had earned himself All-State and All-Catholic honors while playing football at his high school. Then he played in college in California before being transferred over to Georgia. He remained relatively successful until 2021, at which point he dropped out and didn't graduate. After he left school, he became a murderer. We still don't know why he shot Elijah. He didn't even know him. Elijah was working graveyard shift by himself when Crumpton walked up and shot him for no reason. In the security footage, you can see him committing this crime, walking back and forth a few times in the store, and then leaving without taking a single thing. It's been devastating for Elijah's family, especially since it all seemed so pointless. 4. Basketball star turned murderer. Tashawn Hightower was the Tulane College basketball star who turned into a murderer. The 22-year-old was arrested in April of 2020 on a homicide charge. Up until the murder, he'd been leading the Green Wave in scoring and had recently been declared for the NBA draft. But his dreams of stardom were shattered on April 8th when he got involved with a group of people who committed a homicide in Stockbridge, Georgia. The victim was Devontae Anthony Long, dead from gunshot wounds after he was caught in a violent confrontation. According to reports, Tashawn was with a group of 6 men, including his brother, when they confronted Devontae. Devontae had apparently pistol-whipped one of Tashawn's friends, and the confrontation erupted in gunfire. It's unclear who exactly pulled the trigger, although Tashawn's lawyer claims it was his brother. Whatever the case, and whoever pulled that trigger, all 6 men were involved in the murder and they're all going down. Hightower was immediately let go from his team and skipped over for the NBA draft. He was just over 1 week away from getting into the NBA, and he blew it to commit a murder. 3. The bizarre story of Nigel Brannon. Austin, PA football player Nigel J. Ron Brannon was arrested on charges of aggravated assault after he slashed another player's neck during a fight over a room key. It happened on July 22nd, 2021. It was about 7 o'clock at night in the University Landing Apartments. The victim and the football player, who happened to be roommates, were looking around for Brannon's key. The key had seemingly got lost, and Brannon wouldn't let his roommate leave until it was found. This turned into a really violent argument, at which point Brannon pulled out a knife. When the man tried to leave the situation, Brannon slashed him across the neck and cut his wrist. Luckily, the victim was able to fight back, push Brannon out of his way and sprint out the door. About 6 minutes later, the victim flagged down a Clarksville police officer and reported what had happened. He required stitches to his neck and had to get the deep laceration on his left wrist sealed. When the police asked Brannon what had happened, he said he was angry because he thought his roommate stole the key to his room. It proved to be a pretty terrible decision for Nigel. He was suspended from the team and things spiraled from there. Shortly after this incident, on November 1st, he was discovered dead in Oklahoma City. According to the police, he was inside a vehicle with a man named Paris Tolver conducting illegal activity. Something went wrong between the 2 men, and Paris pulled out a gun and shot him. The ex-football player was killed, and Paris was booked on first-degree murder. Even though Nigel Brannon was clearly a troubled individual, this is still a tragic case. He was a rising football star with a promising future, and it all started spiraling down the drain the moment he let his anger get the better of him and picked up that knife. 2. An unwanted butt slap. Cleveland Brown wide receiver Odell Beckham Jr. was issued an arrest warrant by the New Orleans police. It was following a post-game celebration after LSU won the NCAA football championship in 2020. It all started because a complaint came in that Beckham had behaved inappropriately at the celebration. He'd slapped a woman on her behind while inside the LSU locker room at the Mercedes-Benz Superdome. It wasn't just any woman either, it was a police officer. The officer whirled around and confronted Beckham about his inappropriate touching, but he wasn't arrested at the time. She decided later to file a complaint and go through with the arrest. Beckham started at LSU before he was selected by the New York Giants and later traded to the Browns. The arrest warrant fiasco was actually retracted before he got charged with anything. He got away clean, but this should stand as a pretty good lesson not to slap a stranger's behind, even in a locker room. 1. A weapon on campus. A Georgia football player was arrested in November of 2021 on 3 felony charges related to property damage and carrying a weapon in a safety zone. His name is Nyland Green, and he was the freshman defensive tackle for the Bulldogs. He was in the national top 100 class in the 2021 signing class and had appeared in 3 games up until his arrest. Here's what he did, according to the University of Georgia Police Department report. Security and the university responded to a complaint just after 4 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, November 14th. A man was on campus with a gun, dry firing it in the direction of another man. Dry firing is when someone pulls the trigger but there are no bullets in the weapon. It's not technically firing the weapon, but it's still extremely frowned upon, especially on a school campus. When the university police showed up, they found the football player in possession of a BB gun. It wasn't quite as bad as a real gun, but still a weapon. They also discovered a second BB gun hiding in his dorm room. It was enough that the school officers wished to pursue criminal charges. Then, shortly after, in what appeared to be the result of a fit of rage, the police were called yet again. Nyland Green had smashed out some windows by shooting them with BB guns. Thanks for watching. Would you rather have your favorite sports star kicked off the team for murder, or witness a member on the team commit a terrible crime and get away with it? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.